I used to think the worst thing that could happen to a marriage was death. Turns out, I was wrong. The worst thing is when death is a lie, and the person you buried wasn't buried at all. My name is Robert Sullivan, and this is the story of how my wife died twice. Kate and I met at the most boring conference imaginable, a healthcare equipment expo in Denver, where I was pitching surgical monitors to hospital administrators, and she was there investigating insurance fraud claims. While everyone else was networking over overpriced cocktails, we ended up at the hotel bar comparing horror stories about paperwork and corporate bureaucracy. "You know what I love about insurance fraud?" she said, twirling her martini olive with surgical precision. "People think they're so clever, but they always mess up the details. Always." I should have paid more attention to that comment. We dated for 2 years before I proposed at Red Rocks during a Jason Mraz concert. She said yes before I even finished the question, and we were married 9 months later in a ceremony that Kate planned with the same methodical attention she brought to investigating fraudulent claims. Everything perfect, everything documented, everything filed away properly. That was Kate. Meticulous, organized, the kind of person who read the fine print on everything and actually understood it. While I focused on the big picture and closing sales, she handled our finances, insurance policies, legal documents. I trusted her completely. Why wouldn't I? She was brilliant at what she did. Our house in Littleton was the American dream materialized. 4 bedrooms, granite countertops, a 2-car garage, and a mortgage that Kate had calculated down to the penny we could comfortably afford. She kept our financial records in color-coded filing cabinets and could tell you how much we spent on groceries in any given month for the past 3 years. "Organization is the foundation of security," she'd say, updating our budget spreadsheets every Sunday morning while I read the sports section. "Plan for everything, and nothing can surprise you." For 9 years, our life hummed along like a well-tuned machine. I traveled throughout Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, selling medical equipment to hospitals and clinics. Kate investigated insurance claims from her office downtown, working with police departments and fire marshals to identify suspicious patterns in accident reports and medical claims. We weren't one of those couples who finished each other's sentences or shared every thought. We were partners, teammates who trusted each other to handle our respective responsibilities. Kate managed the home front. I brought in the income. And together we built something solid and predictable. The first crack appeared about 2 years before everything fell apart, though I didn't recognize it at the time. The distance grows. "I'm going to be late again tonight," Kate said, checking her phone while pouring coffee into her travel mug. It was a Thursday morning in February 2021, and she'd worked late 3 nights that week already. "We've got this massive fraud case involving staged accidents. The police need someone who understands medical billing irregularities." "Which department?" I asked, not really paying attention as I scrolled through emails on my phone. I had back-to-back meetings scheduled in Colorado Springs and needed to review my presentation notes. "Grand Junction. There's this detective, Brandon Garrett, who's really sharp about financial patterns. We're coordinating on several cases." I looked up from my phone. "Grand Junction's 3 hours away. You're driving there for meetings?" "Sometimes, but mostly we're doing phone conferences and document reviews. It's just intensive work right now." Kate had always been dedicated to her job, but the late nights were becoming more frequent. She'd come home exhausted, grab a quick dinner, then retreat to her home office to finish up some documentation. When I'd knock and ask if she wanted to watch a movie or just talk, she'd say she was on a deadline. Our conversations became functional, who was picking up groceries, when the mortgage payment was due, whether we needed to schedule the furnace maintenance. We were roommates sharing expenses and a mortgage, not the couple who used to stay up until 2 a.m. planning vacations and arguing about whether to get a dog. "You okay?" I asked one evening in April 2021, finding her in the kitchen staring blankly at a stack of case files. "You seem stressed lately." "Just work stuff," she said, quickly closing one of the folders. Insurance fraud is getting more sophisticated. People are working with insiders now, medical professionals, police officers, even forensic technicians. It's not just fake slip and falls anymore. Sounds complicated. It is. And when you're dealing with law enforcement, everything has to be perfect. One mistake in the documentation and the whole case falls apart. I wrapped my arms around her from behind, feeling the tension in her shoulders. "Maybe you should take some vacation time. We haven't been anywhere in over a year." "After this case closes," she said, leaning back against me for just a moment before stepping away. "I can't leave the team hanging when we're this close to making arrests." That became her standard response to everything. "After this case closes. After the reports are filed. After the prosecutions are complete." Always something keeping her at the office until 8 or 9 at night. Always another phone call with Detective Brandon Garrett about coordination protocols and evidence documentation. I should have been more suspicious, but Kate's job had always involved irregular hours and complex cases. Insurance fraud investigation wasn't a 9-to-5 job, especially when it involved coordinating with multiple police departments across different jurisdictions. And honestly, my own travel schedule was becoming more demanding as my company expanded our territory. In fall of 2022, I was promoted to regional manager, which meant more travel and larger accounts. Some weeks I was gone 3 out of 5 days, driving to Cheyenne on Monday, flying to Salt Lake City on Wednesday, presenting to hospital boards, and meeting with purchasing directors. Kate and I were like ships passing in the night. She'd be leaving for work as I was getting home from a trip, or I'd be packing for another road trip while she was on a conference call with the team. Our physical intimacy became as scheduled as everything else. Saturday mornings when we were both home, if neither of us was too tired, if her phone wasn't ringing with another urgent development in whatever case was consuming her attention. Even then, it felt obligatory, like another item on Kate's to-do list that she could check off and move on from. "Are we okay?" I asked her one Saturday morning in January 2023, after she'd spent an entire weekend on her laptop, preparing for a big meeting on Monday. "Of course we're okay," she said, without looking up from her screen. "Why would you ask that?" "Because I feel like I'm living with a stranger lately. You're always working, always distracted, always somewhere else even when you're sitting right here." She finally looked at me, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes. Guilt, maybe, or fear. But then her expression smoothed into the professional mask she wore when dealing with difficult clients. "I know I've been busy, but this case is huge. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar fraud ring with connections across 3 states. When we break it, it's going to save insurance companies massive amounts of money and put some really bad people in prison." "And after this case closes?" "After this case closes, things will be different," she said, reaching over to squeeze my hand. "I promise." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that Kate was just going through a demanding period at work and that our marriage would return to normal once the case was resolved. But deep down, I was starting to suspect that normal didn't exist anymore. The insurance conversation. The first week of March 2023, Kate brought up life insurance over dinner at Olive Garden. our attempt at a date night that felt more like a business meeting between two polite strangers. "I've been thinking about our policies," she said, cutting her chicken parmigiana into precise squares. "We should increase the coverage." "Why?" I asked. "We just reviewed them 18 months ago. My company's offering group rate discounts, and with your promotion we can afford higher premiums. Plus, if anything happened to either of us, the surviving spouse would need significant financial support." Kate had always been practical about money, so this didn't seem unusual. She'd been the one to insist we get life insurance in the first place, calculating exactly how much we'd need to pay off the mortgage and maintain our standard of living if one of us died. "How much are we talking about?" "I'm thinking 500,000 for you, 1 million for me," she said, not looking up from her meticulously organized plate. "I make less than you right now, but I have better growth potential in fraud investigation. The insurance industry is expanding rapidly." $1 million seems like a lot. Not really. Consider the mortgage, my student loans, potential medical expenses if I got sick, lost income over 20 or 30 years. $1 million would give you enough to pay off all our debts and still have sufficient investment capital to maintain your lifestyle. She pulled out a manila folder. Of course, she'd brought paperwork to dinner, and showed me actuarial charts and premium calculations. Everything was color-coded and cross-referenced, typical Kate organization. She'd even calculated the tax implications of different payout structures. "Look, if I die tomorrow, you get $1 million tax-free. You could pay off the house completely and still have $700,000 to invest. At a conservative 6% return, that's $42,000 a year in investment income alone." "Okay, but what about the premiums?" "The premiums are deductible because we're both self-employed contractors. My company counts as a consulting business for tax purposes, and your sales commissions qualify for independent contractor deductions. We actually save money on taxes." I signed the papers because Kate understood insurance and finance better than I did, and because everything she said made logical sense. The premiums were reasonable, the tax benefits were legitimate, and if something did happen to either of us, the surviving spouse would be financially secure. "You'll need to take a physical for the 500,000 policy," she said, filing the signed documents in her purse. "I can schedule it for next week." "What about your physical?" "Already done. I had it last month during my annual exam. Dr. Patterson just had to fill out some additional forms." The physical was routine. Blood pressure, blood work, basic questions about my health history and lifestyle. The insurance company nurse was friendly and professional, taking more detailed medical information than I expected for a life insurance policy. "Your wife's policy requires a more comprehensive exam because of the coverage amount," she explained, drawing what seemed like an unusual amount of blood. "We need complete medical records for policies over 750,000. She mentioned she already had her physical. "Yes, we have her files. Very thorough documentation. Your wife is excellent about maintaining medical records." The policies were approved 3 weeks later. Kate handled all the paperwork and filed the documents in our home office filing cabinet, along with everything else related to our financial security. I didn't think about life insurance again until after she died, or after I thought she died. The training seminar. Friday, April 28, 2023, started like any other day. I was making coffee when Kate came downstairs with her overnight bag packed. "Grand Junction training seminar?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She'd mentioned it several times during the week. "Advanced fraud investigation techniques," she said, checking her phone. Brandon's presenting a session on evidence documentation, and the state insurance commissioner is giving a keynote on new regulations. When will you be back? Sunday evening. Maybe Monday morning if the sessions run late. She kissed me goodbye, a quick peck on the cheek that felt more like a business handshake. I watched her load her suitcase into her Honda Civic and back out of our driveway, heading west toward the mountains. That was the last time I saw my wife alive. Or so I thought. I spent Friday evening catching up on paperwork and watching the Nuggets game. Saturday, I played golf with my friend Mike and grabbed dinner at a sports bar. It was a perfectly normal weekend, the kind of quiet, comfortable routine that married people fall into after nearly a decade together. The phone rang at 8:47 p.m. Saturday night. I remember the exact time because I was checking the score of the Padres game when the call came in. Mr. Sullivan, this is Trooper James Mitchell with Colorado State Patrol. Sir, I'm calling about your wife, Catherine Blake Sullivan. My stomach dropped. In that instant, every worst-case scenario flashed through my mind. Mountain highways, weather conditions, drunk drivers, mechanical failure. Is she okay? Sir, I'm very sorry to inform you that your wife was killed in a motor vehicle accident earlier this evening near Grand Junction. The words didn't make sense. They bounced around in my brain without connecting to anything real or meaningful. Kate was at a training seminar. Kate was a careful driver. Kate was supposed to come home Sunday. What happened? Preliminary investigation indicates she lost control of her vehicle on Highway 6 near Palisade. The car rolled over and caught fire. Sir, I need to ask, are you able to drive to Grand Junction tonight? Or would you prefer to have a local officer? I'll drive, I said, though I'm not sure how the words came out. My hands were shaking and my mouth felt like cotton. Where do I go? Trooper Mitchell gave me directions to the Colorado State Patrol office and the name of the detective handling the case. I wrote the information on a napkin because I couldn't find a pen, my handwriting barely legible because my hands wouldn't stop trembling. The drive to Grand Junction took 4 hours through mountain darkness that felt endless and surreal. I kept expecting my phone to ring with Kate calling to say there'd been a mistake, that she was fine, that some other Catherine Blake Sullivan had died in a car accident, and this was all a horrible mix-up. But my phone never rang. The investigation detective Amy Torres met me at the State Patrol office at 1:30 in the morning. She was younger than I'd expected, with tired eyes and the kind of patient professionalism that suggested she'd delivered terrible news to families before. Mr. Sullivan, I know this is an incredibly difficult time, but I need to walk you through what we know about the accident. She led me to a small conference room and spread photos across the table. They showed a section of Highway 6 where the guardrail was damaged, skid marks on the asphalt, and a burned area in the ravine below where Kate's car had come to rest. Your wife was traveling eastbound when she apparently lost control of the vehicle, Detective Torres said, pointing to the skid marks. The car went through the guardrail, rolled approximately 100 feet down the embankment, and caught fire. Was anyone else involved? Another car? No, sir. This appears to be a single vehicle accident. No witnesses, and no indication of mechanical failure or foul play. The fire was extensive. By the time hikers spotted the wreckage Sunday morning and called 911, there wasn't much left of the vehicle. Sunday morning? I stared at the photos, trying to process the timeline. When did this happen? We estimate Saturday evening, probably between 7 and 9 o'clock based on when she was last seen leaving her hotel. What hotel? Detective Torres checked her notes. The Hampton Inn downtown. She checked out Saturday around 6 p.m. The desk clerk remembered her because she seemed to be in a hurry. But the seminar wasn't supposed to end until Sunday. We haven't been able to locate anyone from the insurance seminar yet. We're still tracking down contact information for the other attendees. Something felt wrong about the timeline, but my brain wasn't working clearly enough to identify exactly what bothered me. Kate had said the seminar was a two-day event, Friday and Saturday, but according to the police, she'd left the hotel Saturday evening before the sessions were complete. The body, I started to ask, then stopped because I couldn't finish the sentence. I'm very sorry, Mr. Sullivan. The fire was extensive. We'll need dental records for identification. Dental records? It's standard procedure when visual identification isn't possible. Do you know who your wife's dentist is? I gave them the name of Kate's dentist and signed papers authorizing the release of her dental records. Everything felt mechanical and unreal, like I was watching someone else handle the administrative details of my wife's death. How long will the identification process take? Usually 72 to 96 hours, Detective Torres said. We have an excellent forensic odontologist, Dr. Patricia Wells, who works with our medical examiner's office. She's very thorough. I stayed in Grand Junction through Monday, handling police paperwork and waiting for the official identification. The desk clerk at the Hampton Inn confirmed that Kate had checked out Saturday evening, but couldn't provide any additional details about her departure or her activities during the weekend. Monday afternoon, Detective Torres called to confirm what I already knew in my gut. The dental records matched. Catherine Blake Sullivan was officially dead. The drive home to Littleton was the longest 4 hours of my life. I called Kate's mother, my parents, my boss, and a dozen other people who needed to know that Kate was gone. Each conversation felt like practice for the next one, repeating the same terrible facts until they started to feel real. Kate was dead. She'd died in a car accident near Grand Junction. The funeral would be Friday. But I still couldn't shake the feeling that something about the accident didn't add up. The funeral. Friday, May 5th, 2023. St. Catherine's Catholic Church in Littleton, which Kate had chosen 3 years earlier when we'd discussed funeral preferences during one of her meticulous insurance planning sessions. She'd wanted a Catholic service even though we rarely attended Mass, and she'd specifically requested a closed casket funeral. I don't want people staring at my body, she'd said matter-of-factly while updating our wills. Death should be dignified. At the time, I'd thought her morbid for planning her own funeral in such detail. Now I was grateful that she'd removed the burden of making those decisions while numb with grief. The church was packed. Kate's co-workers from the insurance company filled 3 entire pews. Her college friends drove in from California and Texas. Neighbors, clients, even people I barely recognized came to pay their respects to a woman who'd been meticulous about maintaining professional relationships. Brandon Garrett sat in the second pew with other members of Kate's fraud investigation team. He was a thin man in his 40s with graying hair and wire-rimmed glasses, exactly the kind of detail-oriented law enforcement officer who would appreciate Kate's methodical approach to complex cases. After the service, Brandon approached me at the reception. "Rob, I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, shaking my hand with both of his. Kate was exceptional at her job, the best fraud investigator I've ever worked with. She mentioned you several times, said you were really sharp about financial patterns. We worked well together. She had a gift for seeing connections that other people missed. Her documentation was always flawless. There was something in his voice, a sadness that seemed deeper than professional respect for a colleague. But I was too exhausted and emotionally drained to analyze the nuances of how Kate's coworkers were grieving. "The cases you were working on together," I said. "Will someone else take them over?" Already reassigned to other investigators, Kate's files were extremely well organized, so the transition should be smooth. She would have wanted the cases to be completed properly. Kate's mother, Linda Blake, moved in with me for 2 weeks to help handle the endless administrative details that follow a death. Death certificates, insurance claims, social security notifications, credit card cancellations, bank account updates. Kate had organized our lives so efficiently that even her death required careful documentation and systematic processing. The life insurance claim was surprisingly straightforward. Kate had filed all the necessary paperwork correctly, including a copy of the death certificate and police accident report. The insurance company's Special Investigations Unit reviewed the claim for potential fraud, standard procedure for any policy less than 2 years old, but found no irregularities. "Your wife was very thorough about documentation," the claims adjuster told me during a phone interview 6 weeks after Kate's death. "All her medical records, financial information, and employment verification were properly filed. We're processing a partial payment of $200,000 immediately for immediate expenses, with the remaining $800,000 to be distributed after our 90-day review period." I should have been relieved that the insurance money would eliminate our mortgage and provide financial security. Instead, I felt guilty about benefiting from Kate's death, like I was somehow profiting from losing the person I loved most. The $200,000 was deposited into our joint checking account in July. I used $50,000 to pay off Kate's student loans and our credit cards, put another $50,000 into a money market account for emergency expenses, and left the rest sitting in checking because I couldn't bring myself to make long-term financial decisions yet. Everything about Kate's death was organized, documented, and efficient, just the way she would have wanted it. Which is why what happened 9 months later was so impossible to believe. The Resurrection, April 15th, 2024. Sky Harbor Airport in Phoenix, Arizona. I was waiting for a connecting flight to Los Angeles for a medical equipment conference, the first work trip I'd taken since Kate died. My company had been patient about my grief leave, but eventually I had to return to normal life and normal responsibilities. I was sitting near Gate B7, reading emails and trying to psych myself up for 3 days of sales presentations when I saw her. Kate, my dead wife, standing in line at Starbucks 50 feet away. My brain refused to process what my eyes were seeing. I stared at the woman's profile, cataloging every detail that matched my memories of Kate. The same height, the same auburn hair, the same way of standing with her weight shifted to her left leg when she was thinking about something. Then she turned slightly to check her phone, and I saw the scar on her left hand from where she'd cut herself opening a can of tomatoes 3 years ago. Kate. Alive. Healthy. Wearing clothes I'd never seen before and looking like she'd lost 15 pounds, but unmistakably, impossibly, Kate. I stood up so fast I knocked over my coffee, not caring about the hot liquid soaking through my pants. I walked toward Starbucks like a man in a dream, unable to believe what I was seeing but unable to look away. She was ordering a venti chai tea latte with extra foam, Kate's exact drink, something she'd ordered hundreds of times during our marriage. When the barista called her name, she said, "Michelle," but her voice was Kate's voice, slightly hoarse like she was getting over a cold. I got within 10 feet of her before she noticed me. Our eyes met across the crowded terminal, and the look on her face was pure terror. Not surprise, not embarrassment, not confusion. Terror. She knew she'd been caught. "Kate," I said, loud enough for her to hear over the airport noise. "Kate, what the hell?" She bolted. I chased her through Sky Harbor Airport, shouting my wife's name while she ran toward the security checkpoint. Other passengers stared as I pursued a woman who appeared to be fleeing from me, but I didn't care about making a scene. I needed answers. She had a boarding pass and ID ready. She went through TSA security while I stood helplessly on the wrong side of the checkpoint, watching her disappear into the secure area. "Sir, is there a problem?" A TSA supervisor approached me, concerned about a man who'd been shouting and chasing a woman through the terminal. "That's my wife," I said, knowing how crazy it sounded. "She died in a car accident 11 months ago, but that's her. That's Kate." The supervisor looked at me with the patient expression people use when dealing with someone who might be having a mental breakdown. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step over here and talk to airport security." I spent 2 hours in a small office explaining the situation to airport police, who took my report with professional skepticism. They checked surveillance footage, but the cameras hadn't captured a clear view of the woman's face. And even if they had, what crime would they be investigating? Being alive wasn't illegal, even if your husband thought you were dead. "Did you get a good look at her identification?" Officer Martinez asked. "No, but I'm telling you, that was my wife. Same height, same hair, same scar on her hand. She even ordered her usual drink." "A lot of people ordered chai lattes, Mr. Sullivan. And if your wife died in Colorado 11 months ago, then whoever you saw today was someone who happened to resemble her." "Then why did she run when she saw me?" "Maybe because a strange man was shouting and chasing her through an airport." I flew to Los Angeles that afternoon, but spent the entire conference distracted and useless. Every woman I saw from behind made my heart race. Every auburn-haired passenger at LAX made me do a double take. I couldn't focus on product presentations or client meetings because my brain kept replaying those 10 seconds when Kate and I had made eye contact. The look of terror on her face wasn't the expression of someone who'd been mistaken for a dead person. It was the look of someone whose carefully constructed lie had just collapsed. Kate was alive, which meant everything I believed about the past 11 months was wrong. The investigation begins. I hired a private investigator the day I got back from Los Angeles. Jennifer Kim operated out of a small office in downtown Phoenix and specialized in missing persons cases. Her website mentioned 15 years with the FBI and experience tracking people who didn't want to be found. "Tell me about your wife," she said, taking notes while I explained the airport encounter. "Start from the beginning." I spent 3 hours describing Kate's personality, her job, our marriage, the accident in Grand Junction, and everything that had felt wrong about her death. Jennifer listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification about dates or specific details. "You said she handled all your financial paperwork," Jennifer said. "Did she have access to significant amounts of cash?" "The life insurance payout was $1 million, but that came to me after she died. She couldn't have accessed it beforehand." "What about other accounts? Savings, investments, credit cards?" "We had joint checking and savings, maybe 30,000 total. She had a company credit card for work expenses, but I don't think the limits were very high." "I'll need copies of all your financial records from the past 2 years. Bank statements, credit card bills, insurance policies, tax returns. If your wife faked her death, she would have needed money to establish a new identity and start over somewhere else." Jennifer's fee was $200 per hour plus expenses, with a $5,000 retainer. It seemed like a lot of money, but if Kate was alive, I needed to know what had happened and why she'd let me think she was dead for almost a year. I have to warn you, Jennifer said as I signed her contract. If your wife is alive and chose to fake her death, she's committed serious federal crimes: insurance fraud, identity theft, potentially bigamy if she's married to someone else. When we find her, and we will find her, she's going to prison. I understand. I'm not sure you do. If she collected $1 million life insurance payout by faking her death, she's looking at 25 years in federal prison. The FBI will handle the prosecution, not local police. This isn't going to end with an emotional reunion and couples therapy. I understood what Jennifer was telling me, but I didn't care about the legal consequences. I needed to know the truth about what had happened to my marriage and why Kate had chosen to destroy our life together. The investigation started with airlines. Jennifer had contacts at TSA and access to passenger manifest data through proper legal channels. Within a week, she'd identified 3 possible flights that Michelle could have taken from Phoenix on April 15th. Delta 447 to Dallas, Southwest 1205 to Houston, American 628 to Denver, Jennifer said, spreading flight information across her desk. I'm betting Dallas. It's a major hub, easy to connect to anywhere in the country, and Texas has loose residency requirements for establishing new identity documents. How do we find out for sure? Surveillance video from Dallas Airport if they still have it. Cross-reference facial recognition software with the image we pulled from Phoenix security cameras. It's not cheap, and it takes time, but if she flew to Dallas, we'll find the proof. While Jennifer worked her law enforcement contacts, I returned to Colorado to dig through Kate's personal belongings for clues I might have missed. Her home office was exactly as she'd left it. Filing cabinets full of insurance cases, a desktop computer with password protection I couldn't crack, and boxes of professional development materials. But hidden in the back of her closet, behind winter coats she rarely wore, I found something that made my blood run cold. A prepaid Visa card with a $5,000 limit, never activated. The card was issued in February 2023, 2 months before Kate's death, under the name Michelle Martinez. According to the paperwork, it had been mailed to a UPS store in Boulder, Colorado. Michelle Martinez, the same name Kate had been using at Starbucks in Phoenix. My wife had been planning to fake her death for months. The new life. Jennifer's contact at Dallas Airport came through with surveillance footage that confirmed our suspicions. The woman who'd fled from me in Phoenix had indeed flown to Dallas on April 15th, and facial recognition software provided a 94% probability match with Kate's driver's license photo. She's living in the Dallas area under the name Michelle Martinez, Jennifer reported during our phone call 3 weeks after I'd hired her. Married to a man named Marcus Wright. They've been married since October 2022. October 2022, 6 months before Kate's death. Which meant she'd been married to 2 men simultaneously, planning her escape while still living with me and handling our insurance policies. Where in Dallas? Richardson. Suburban address, nice neighborhood. She's listed as a stepmother to Wright's 2 children from a previous marriage. The children detail hit me like a physical blow. Kate had never wanted kids during our marriage, claiming her career was too demanding and children would interfere with our financial planning. Apparently, she'd changed her mind when she found a new husband and a new life. What does Marcus Wright do for work? That's where this gets interesting, Jennifer said. He's an evidence technician with the Richardson Police Department. 15 years on the job, specializes in forensic evidence processing and documentation. Police officer, evidence technician, civilian position, but he has access to evidence databases, forensic reports, and interagency communication systems. The pieces were starting to fit together in a way that made me sick to my stomach. Kate's job investigating insurance fraud had brought her into contact with police departments throughout Colorado. Marcus Wright had access to evidence processing systems that could manipulate forensic data. Jennifer, is it possible that Marcus helped Kate fake the accident in Grand Junction? It's possible, but proving it will require federal investigation resources that I don't have. If they falsified evidence in a death investigation, we're talking about conspiracy charges, evidence tampering, obstruction of justice. This is bigger than insurance fraud. What do we do next? I contact the FBI. This crosses state lines, involves federal crimes, and requires investigation techniques that private investigators can't legally pursue. I flew to Dallas the next day and rented a car to drive through Richardson, looking for the address Jennifer had given me. 1247. Maple Drive was a modest two-story house in a neighborhood of young families and well-maintained lawns. Kate's Honda Civic, or an identical car, was parked in the driveway next to a blue pickup truck. I sat in my rental car across the street for 4 hours, watching the house like a stalker. At 3:30 p.m., a school bus stopped and 2 children got off, a boy around 10 years old and a girl maybe 7. They ran up the driveway and into the house, calling, "Mom, we're home." 45 minutes later, Kate came out to collect mail from the mailbox. She was wearing jeans and a sweater I'd never seen, her hair cut shorter than she'd worn it during our marriage. She looked healthy and relaxed, like a suburban mother living a comfortable life. She looked happy. I wanted to get out of the car and confront her right there on the street, to demand answers about what she'd done to our marriage and why she'd let me suffer through her funeral while she was playing house with another family. But Jennifer had been clear about the legal implications. If I confronted Kate directly, she might disappear again before the FBI could build a case. I had to be patient and let the federal investigation proceed properly. So I took pictures with my phone, documented the address and license plate numbers, and drove back to the airport feeling like my entire life had been a lie. Federal investigation. Special Agent Patricia Wells of the FBI Dallas Field Office was a woman in her 50s with gray hair and the kind of focused intensity that suggested she'd investigated financial crimes for decades. She reviewed Jennifer's evidence file with the methodical attention that Kate would have appreciated. Wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, conspiracy, Agent Wells said, checking items off a legal pad. If your wife collected life insurance proceeds by faking her death, she's looking at federal charges that carry serious prison time. How serious? 20 to 25 years, minimum. And if Marcus Wright helped her manipulate evidence in the Grand Junction investigation, he's looking at similar charges for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. What do you need from me? Complete financial records for the past 3 years. Insurance policies, bank statements, credit card bills, tax returns. We need to trace every dollar your wife accessed before her supposed death. Agent Wells also wanted detailed information about Kate's job and her relationship with various police departments throughout Colorado. The fact that she'd been working closely with law enforcement on fraud investigations would have given her insights into how deaths were investigated and what evidence would be required for official identification. Your wife understood the system from both sides, Agent Wells explained. She knew what insurance companies looked for in fraudulent claims, and she knew how police departments process evidence in accidental deaths. That knowledge, would have helped her plan the perfect crime. The FBI investigation moved slowly but thoroughly. They subpoenaed financial records from multiple banks and credit card companies, tracking money movements that I'd never noticed during our marriage. They requested employment records from Kate's insurance company and coordinated with Colorado authorities to review the Grand Junction accident investigation. 6 weeks later, Agent Wells called with preliminary findings that confirmed my worst suspicions. Your wife accessed significant amounts of cash during the 6 months before her death, she said. Small withdrawals from multiple ATMs, prepaid credit card purchases, money transfers to accounts we're still tracking. Total amount was approximately $47,000. How is that possible? We only had $30,000 in savings. Credit card advances, insurance company expense reimbursements, and what appears to be fraudulent billing for investigation services that were never performed. She was systematically draining money from multiple sources without triggering automatic fraud detection. What about the accident investigation? We're reviewing that with Colorado authorities. The Grand Junction Police Department is cooperating fully, but some of the evidence documentation from that case is irregularly processed. Meaning what? Meaning the dental records used to identify your wife's body may not be legitimate. We're ordering DNA testing on the remains to determine the actual identity of the accident victim. DNA testing. It hadn't occurred to me that the body in Kate's grave might not be Kate at all. That some other woman had died in that car accident and been buried under my wife's name while Kate started a new life in Texas. How long will DNA testing take? 4 to 6 weeks for preliminary results. Longer if we need additional comparative samples. We'll need a DNA sample from you to establish baseline markers for comparison. I gave a DNA sample that afternoon. A simple cheek swab that would help determine whether my wife was actually buried in Littleton Memorial Cemetery or whether some stranger had been laid to rest under Kate's headstone. While waiting for DNA results, the FBI began surveillance of Kate and Marcus in Richardson. They documented their daily routines, monitored their financial activity, and prepared search warrants for their home and Marcus's workplace. They're planning to run, Agent Wells told me during a briefing in early October. Increased cash withdrawals, travel websites visited, inquiries about passport renewals. They know the investigation is closing in. How do you know? Digital surveillance, search terms on their computers, browsing history, encrypted messaging apps. They're researching countries without extradition treaties and methods for transferring money internationally. Will you arrest them before they disappear? That's the plan. But we need DNA results to confirm the identity of the Grand Junction victim before we can prove your wife committed insurance fraud by faking her death. The DNA results came back on October 23, 2024. I was sitting in Agent Wells' office when she opened the envelope from the FBI laboratory in Quantico. The remains buried under your wife's name are those of Maria Santos, a 26-year-old undocumented immigrant from El Paso, she said, reading from the report. Ms. Santos had been reported missing by her family 3 days before the Grand Junction accident. Maria Santos, a young woman whose death had been used to facilitate Kate's elaborate fraud scheme, whose family had grieved without knowing what happened to her while my wife collected insurance money and started a new life. What happened to her? We don't know yet. The Grand Junction Police Department is reopening the investigation as a potential homicide. If your wife and Marcus Wright killed Ms. Santos to provide a body for the staged accident, they're looking at murder charges in addition to fraud. Murder. The word hung in the air between us like a death sentence. My wife might be a killer. The arrests. November 15th, 2024. 6 a.m. Coordinated raids on the Richardson house and the Richardson Police Department evidence facility where Marcus Wright worked. I watched from a surveillance van parked 2 blocks away as FBI agents and local police surrounded 1247 Maple Drive. Agent Wells wore a bulletproof vest and carried a megaphone, though she hoped the arrest would proceed without incident. FBI! Search warrant! She called through the megaphone. Exit the house with your hands visible. Marcus Wright came out first, wearing pajama pants and a t-shirt, his hands raised above his head. 2 agents immediately handcuffed him and read him his rights while searching him for weapons. Kate appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later, also in pajamas, looking around the street in confusion and panic. She seemed genuinely surprised by the raid, like she'd expected to have more time before the investigation caught up with her. Catherine Blake Sullivan, you're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, identity theft, and conspiracy, Agent Wells announced as Kate was handcuffed. You have the right to remain silent. The 2 children, Marcus's kids from his previous marriage, watched from an upstairs window as their stepmother was loaded into a federal transport vehicle. They looked terrified and confused, losing another parental figure to circumstances they couldn't understand. At the same time, FBI agents were searching Marcus's workplace and seizing evidence from multiple cases he'd processed over the past 2 years. They found falsified documentation, manipulated forensic reports, and evidence that he'd been selling access to law enforcement databases for several months. He was running a side business helping criminals manipulate evidence, Agent Wells explained later. Your wife wasn't his first customer, just his most elaborate one. Both Kate and Marcus were held without bond pending federal trial. The judge determined they were flight risks based on evidence of planned escape and financial resources hidden in offshore accounts. I attended their arraignment hearing in Dallas federal court, sitting in the back row and watching as the woman I'd been married to for 9 years stood before a federal judge in an orange jumpsuit and prison shackles. She didn't look at me during the entire proceeding. Not once. Media circus. The story broke nationally 3 days after the arrests. Woman fakes death in million-dollar insurance fraud was the headline on CNN, Fox News, and every major newspaper in the country. My phone rang constantly with interview requests from reporters, producers, and documentary filmmakers who wanted to tell the story of the ghost wife and the husband who'd discovered his dead wife was actually alive and married to another man. I gave exactly 1 interview to a reporter from the Denver Post because I wanted people to know about Maria Santos and the fact that an innocent woman had died while Kate was orchestrating her elaborate fraud. This isn't just about insurance fraud, I told the reporter. A young woman named Maria Santos was killed, and her family deserves justice. They deserve to know what happened to their daughter. The Richardson community was shocked by the revelations about Marcus Wright's corruption. The police department launched an internal investigation that ultimately implicated 4 other officers in evidence manipulation schemes. The entire forensic department was restructured, and dozens of criminal cases had to be reviewed for potential evidence tampering. Kate's family was devastated. Her mother, Linda Blake, had genuinely grieved her daughter's death and helped me plan the funeral. Learning that Kate was alive and had deliberately put the family through that trauma was almost worse than believing she was actually dead. I don't understand how my daughter could do something so cruel, Linda said during a phone call 2 weeks after the arrests. The Kate I raised would never have hurt people like this. Maybe we never really knew Kate at all, I said. The media attention was overwhelming and invasive. Reporters camped outside my house in Littleton, called my office repeatedly, and tracked down former neighbors and coworkers for comments about Kate's character and our marriage. I took a leave of absence from work and stayed with my parents in Kansas City until the initial media frenzy died down. Even there, I received calls from producers wanting to option our story for television movies and documentary series. I turned them all down. This wasn't entertainment. Maria Santos was dead, 2 children had lost their stepmother, and families on both sides had been destroyed by Kate's selfishness and greed. Federal trial. The trial lasted 6 weeks. Kate and Marcus were tried together with separate juries for each defendant. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and evidence manipulation. Financial records showed Kate had systematically stolen money from multiple sources during the months before her supposed death. Phone records documented hundreds of conversations between Kate and Marcus, including detailed discussions about forensic procedures and evidence documentation requirements. Most damning was Marcus's testimony when he agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence. He described in detail how he'd provided falsified dental records to Colorado authorities, manipulated evidence logs, and helped Kate establish her false identity as Michelle Martinez. She knew exactly what she wanted, Marcus testified. Every detail of the forensic process, every piece of documentation that would be required, every step of the insurance investigation. She'd been planning this for more than a year. Did she express any remorse about the insurance fraud? The prosecutor asked. No. She called it the perfect crime because she understood both sides of the investigation process. Kate's defense attorney argued that she'd been psychologically abused during our marriage and had faked her death to escape an intolerable situation. They painted me as controlling and financially manipulative, claiming Kate had no choice but to stage her own death. It was complete nonsense, but it was the only defense strategy available when the evidence of guilt was so overwhelming. I testified for 2 days, describing our marriage, Kate's personality, and the financial arrangement she'd managed throughout our relationship. The hardest part was answering questions about whether I'd suspected Kate was stealing money or planning something elaborate. Did you notice any changes in your wife's behavior during the months before her supposed death? The prosecutor asked. She was working late more often, talking frequently about cases involving police coordination, and seemed stressed about work pressures. But I trusted her professional judgment. I never suspected she was planning to fake her death. Why did you trust her? Because she was my wife. Because she'd never given me reason to doubt her honesty. Because I loved her and believed she loved me. The defense attorney tried to make me seem naive or willfully ignorant, but the facts spoke for themselves. Kate had been an accomplished liar who'd manipulated everyone who trusted her. Her husband, her family, her co-workers, and the law enforcement officers who'd helped investigate her supposed death. The juries deliberated for 3 days before returning guilty verdicts on all counts for both defendants. Kate was sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. Marcus received 20 years. Both were ordered to pay restitution totaling $1.2 million to the insurance company and $500,000 to me for damages related to emotional distress and fraudulent inducement. 2 years later, I'm living in Portland, Oregon, working for a different medical equipment company and trying to build a life that doesn't involve looking over my shoulder for people who might recognize me from news stories about the ghost wife case. I sold the house in Littleton and most of the furniture Kate had chosen during our marriage. Everything felt contaminated by her deception, like keeping any physical reminders of our life together would prevent me from moving forward. I'm dating a woman named Sarah Campbell, a therapist who specializes in helping people recover from relationship trauma and betrayal. She understands the complexity of grieving someone who never actually died, processing anger towards someone you once loved, and learning to trust again after being so thoroughly deceived. Your wife's death was traumatic, Sarah explained during one of our early conversations. But discovering she was alive and had betrayed you was a different kind of trauma. You experienced real grief for something that never happened, and that's psychologically complex to process. Sarah has helped me understand that Kate's behavior wasn't my fault, that the signs of her deception weren't obvious enough for me to have prevented what happened, and that building new relationships requires accepting risk without becoming paranoid. I still think about Kate sometimes, wondering what she's thinking about during her federal prison sentence, whether she feels any remorse about the people she hurt, whether she ever genuinely loved me, or if our entire marriage was just preparation for her eventual escape. But those thoughts are becoming less frequent and less painful. Sarah says that's progress. I testified before the Colorado legislature in support of Catherine's Law, which strengthened penalties for evidence tampering and created new oversight protocols for forensic investigations. The law was named for Kate, ironically, even though she was the perpetrator rather than the victim. Marcus Wright's police department implemented comprehensive new policies for evidence handling and interagency cooperation. His conviction led to reviews of hundreds of criminal cases and ultimately resulted in the overturning of 17 convictions based on tainted evidence. Maria Santos was finally buried with dignity in her family's cemetery in El Paso. The FBI never determined exactly how she died or whether Kate and Marcus killed her or simply used her body after finding it. The investigation remains open, but with both perpetrators in federal prison, new evidence is unlikely to emerge. Kate's mother visits her in prison twice a year, though she tells me the conversations are difficult and unsatisfying. Kate maintains that she was justified in faking her death, that she was trapped in an unhappy marriage and saw no other option for escape. Linda says Kate never asks about me or expresses regret about the pain she caused. She seems to view herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of an elaborate fraud that destroyed multiple lives. I don't plan to visit Kate in prison. We have nothing to say to each other that would be productive or healing. She made her choices and I'm making mine. My new life in Portland is quiet and ordinary in ways that feel like luxuries after the chaos of the past 3 years. I have a job that doesn't involve travel, a girlfriend who values honesty above all else, and a small apartment with furniture I chose myself. Sometimes I think about what Kate said during our insurance conversation. Plan for everything, and nothing can surprise you. She was wrong about that. You can't plan for everything, especially when the person closest to you is planning to betray everything you've built together. But you can learn to live with uncertainty. You can choose to trust again, despite the risk. You can build something new from the wreckage of what someone else destroyed. That's what I'm doing now. Building something new, something honest, something real. Kate is serving 25 years in federal prison in Texas. She'll be 63 when she's released, assuming she serves her full sentence. Marcus will be 62 when he gets out. By then, I'll be in my 60s, hopefully with a life so full and satisfying that Kate's betrayal will seem like something that happened to a different person in a different lifetime. The ghost wife will finally be laid to rest, and Robert Sullivan will be fully alive.